What would you do if someone in uniform, someone supposed to protect your comfort and dignity, publicly humiliated you in front of dozens of strangers just because of the color of your skin? It was supposed to be a normal flight, just another business trip. The skies were calm. The airport buzzed with families, professionals, and tourists alike. At Gate 42A, Flight 1739 to Denver was boarding. People scrolled through their phones, sipped coffee, or adjusted their carry-ons. And standing among them was Marcus Allen, a sharp-dressed black man in his mid-30s, vice president of a tech firm, traveling for a major conference. He had paid for a first-class ticket, full price, no upgrade, no points. And yet, none of that mattered the moment he stepped onto that plane. As he reached his seat, 3A, he was greeted not with a smile, but a frown. Jessica Whitman, a senior flight attendant with over 12 years of experience, stood rigid with her arms crossed. Her eyes narrowed at Marcus. "Excuse me," she said flatly, "this section is for first-class passengers only." Marcus blinked, confused. "Yes, this is my seat, 3A." She looked him up and down, then said with a smirk, "Are you sure? Maybe you should double-check your boarding pass." He handed it to her. She didn't even glance at it. What happened next? It wasn't just insulting, it was infuriating. In front of a half-board cabin, passengers pausing mid-step to listen, Jessica said loudly enough for several rows to hear, "Sir, if you don't cooperate, I'll have to call security. You need to leave this area immediately." Marcus's face dropped. A mixture of shock, disbelief, and quiet rage rippled across his features. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a moment of raw, unapologetic humiliation. The worst part? No one said a word. Passengers stared. Some looked away awkwardly. Others simply recorded on their phones. And Marcus? He stood there frozen, holding his briefcase, fighting every instinct inside him telling him to lash out. He didn't want to make a scene. He didn't want to confirm the very stereotype she was projecting onto him. So he stood tall, calmly said, "Check the boarding pass again." Another flight attendant walked over. David, young, clearly uncomfortable with the scene unfolding. He scanned Marcus's pass, and immediately his expression changed. Jessica, he's correct. He's in 3A. What Jessica said next will haunt her forever. With a scoff, she muttered under her breath, but loud enough to be heard, "Well, I guess they'll let anyone up here now." In that moment, time froze. One passenger in row 2, Lindsay Carter, slowly raised her phone. She had been recording since the first accusation, and now the camera had captured everything. What happened after that? It would become one of the most talked-about flight incidents in recent months. Because the woman who thought she had all the power was about to face consequences she never expected. Just hours before boarding, Marcus Allen had wrapped up a call with his 8-year-old daughter, Zoe, promising her he'd FaceTime from the hotel. He was tired but excited. His firm, based in Austin, Texas, was shortlisted for a multi-million-dollar tech contract in Denver. This presentation could change the trajectory of his career. First class was more than just a comfort. It was his well-earned right. Years of hard work, late nights, and discrimination he had fought to rise above led him to that very seat. 3A? But as Marcus sat down after the humiliating confrontation, the cabin felt ice-cold. Jessica walked past him repeatedly without making eye contact. She offered water to everyone, except him. She handed out hot towels, even smiled at passengers across the aisle. But Marcus? Invisible. Meanwhile, Lindsay Carter, a 28-year-old vlogger from Atlanta, sitting in row 2C, stopped her recording but couldn't let it go. She whispered to her husband, Jason, "That wasn't just rude, that was targeted." He nodded. She knew exactly what she was doing. Lindsay, known for documenting moments of social injustice and racism on her channel Human First, wasn't going to stay silent. As the plane pushed back from the gate, she opened her laptop and began editing. But she wasn't the only one upset. Further back in 12D, Reverend Thomas Bishop, a civil rights advocate from Detroit flying back from a seminar in Austin, had witnessed the exchange. He quietly jotted down notes. He'd seen this before, time and time again. Different faces, same narrative. And Jessica? She was trying to move on like nothing happened. After all, she thought, it's just another flight. He didn't yell. Nobody will say anything. What she didn't know was that everything had already changed. Mid-flight, Marcus sat in silence, staring out the window. A soft tap broke the moment. It was David, the younger flight attendant. He leaned in, whispered, "I'm really sorry about earlier. That shouldn't have happened." Marcus offered a tight smile, but said nothing. David hesitated. "She's done this before. Not exactly like this, but she treats certain people differently. I've seen it. You're not the first." That single sentence? It hit like thunder. You're not the first. So this wasn't a one-off. This wasn't stress or misunderstanding. This was a pattern, and now it was about to go public. As soon as the wheels touched down in Denver, Lindsay uploaded her video. Title? First Class Racism. Flight Attendant Publicly Humiliates Black Executive. Within 30 minutes, it had over 25,000 views. An hour later, hashtag Justice for Marcus was trending on Twitter. And before Marcus could even get to his hotel, his phone was buzzing with calls from reporters, civil rights groups, and the CEO of his own company. But let's rewind. Who is Jessica Whitman? A 41-year-old flight attendant based in Chicago. Jessica had built a reputation as firm and by the book. But behind the scenes, there were complaints. Minor ones, nothing ever serious enough to stick. Passengers of color often cited unfriendly service, dismissive tone, and aggressive questioning. But without clear video, those claims always got lost in HR jargon. This time, though, it was different. This time, the world was watching. Within 24 hours, her name was trending online. Her LinkedIn profile vanished. So did her Instagram. The airline? Atlantic Skies, one of the top 5 carriers in the U.S., known for its polished branding and diversity-first PR campaigns, was silent at first. But internal chaos was brewing. Emails flooded their customer service inbox. Dozens of passengers shared similar experiences. One even posted screenshots of a formal complaint they had sent 3 months ago about Jessica. And still, the company said nothing. But Marcus wasn't after revenge. He didn't scream. He didn't sue. He simply issued a public statement. "I'm deeply disappointed, but not surprised. This is why we must record. This is why we must speak. Silence allows injustice to feel normal. I will not be silent." That statement was shared over 2.4 million times in 36 hours. But what triggered Jessica's behavior? What was going on beneath the surface? The world was about to find out. When a video of Jessica's confrontation with Marcus went viral, the public initially assumed this was a one-time mistake, a moment of bias gone too far. But when investigative journalists and online sleuths dug deeper into Jessica Whitman's history, what they found sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. It wasn't just a bad moment. It was a documented pattern. Over the span of 5 years, Jessica had received 14 formal complaints from passengers, most of them for people of color. Phrases like, singled out without reason, treated like a threat, spoken to like a criminal, reappeared in multiple reports. One case from 2019 involved Aaron Rodriguez, a Latino Army veteran who was asked to prove his military ID twice after boarding early in uniform. Another complaint was filed by Michelle Osei, a Ghanaian-American professor who was accused by Jessica of faking her boarding pass. Both complaints were investigated and marked as resolved, with no disciplinary action. Why? Because there was no video. Until now. This time, the footage was clear. There was sound. There was tone. There was no room for misinterpretation. But the twist went deeper. On day 3 of the unfolding story, an anonymous former Atlantic Skies employee posted on Reddit under the handle at FlightTruth23. "I worked with Jessica. I reported her twice. Once for threatening to report a black couple for speaking a different language on board. HR buried it. They said there wasn't enough proof and told me not to escalate. I quit after that." The post gained over 75,000 upvotes in a single day. Meanwhile, whistleblowers began contacting Marcus's legal team. Yes, he hadn't intended to sue. But now, with former employees providing testimony and public interest peaking, there was a larger cause at hand. By the end of the week, Marcus filed a civil suit, not just against Jessica, but against Atlantic Skies. Why? Because buried in the airline's own HR logs were unprocessed complaint reports, ignored investigations, and internal messages that showed Jessica had been flagged multiple times and kept flying. They protected her, said attorney Rachel Kim, a fierce civil rights lawyer representing Marcus. They knew, and they let her keep going. That's not negligence. That's complicity. And it wasn't just Jessica anymore. The lawsuit opened a floodgate. Dozens of former flight attendants began speaking up, mostly younger staffers and minorities, who detail the toxic culture of favoritism, retaliation, and suppression. Lana Brooks, a former cabin crew member, went on TikTok. If you were Black, Latino, Asian, or LGBTQ, and you spoke out against a senior white staff member, you were blacklisted. I watched it happen more than once. Jessica wasn't the only one. She was just the most visible. Suddenly, Marcus's case wasn't just a viral moment. It became a national reckoning. News anchors, political figures, and celebrities joined the conversation. Oprah Winfrey tweeted, "When dignity is stolen in public, justice must be delivered in public." And then, the final twist dropped. A leaked internal memo from Atlantic Skies hit the internet. It was never meant to be seen by the public. In it, a senior HR official stated, Jessica Whitman's file is problematic. Multiple customer incidents. However, termination may risk backlash from union. Recommend minimal disciplinary steps and retraining, but continue monitoring. Date, October 2023. That meant the airline knew exactly what they were dealing with, months before Marcus boarded that flight. They just didn't care until it became public. The video, the lawsuit, the leaked memo, it wasn't just damning. It was a collapse of credibility. And for Jessica, her world unraveled fast. The airline suspended her without pay. News trucks sat outside her suburban home in Naperville, Illinois. Her husband, Craig Whitman, filed for divorce 3 weeks later, citing irreconcilable public fallout. She issued an apology on day 12. "I made a mistake. I didn't intend to hurt anyone. I'm truly sorry for what happened and for the pain it caused Mr. Allen and others." But by then, no one was buying it. Because the twist wasn't that Jessica acted with racial bias. The twist was how many people knew and stayed silent until one man stood still, held his boarding pass, and refused to shrink. The fallout wasn't just digital. It was everywhere. News outlets flooded the airwaves. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News, each with their own spin, but no one could deny the facts. A flight attendant had been allowed to fly despite multiple bias complaints, and now the whole system was under fire. Atlantic Skies was bleeding. Reputation, money, and trust. Within 10 days of video's release, they'd lost $43 million in stock value. Shareholders were furious. A class action lawsuit from passengers who had previously filed ignored complaints was being prepped. Meanwhile, Marcus Allen, once an unknown systems analyst from Atlanta, was now the center of a national conversation. But Marcus never asked for the spotlight. In fact, he stayed silent on social media, only issuing a short statement through his legal team. "This isn't just about me. It's about every passenger who's been profiled, humiliated, or silenced. I stood still so the truth could move." Yet the pressure was mounting, not just on the airline, but on the entire aviation industry. Within days, other airlines began facing scrutiny. Former Delta, American, and Southwest passengers came forward with eerily similar stories. Hashtags like #FlyingWhileBlack and #AirlineBias trended globally. The Department of Transportation announced an emergency review of racial bias complaints in aviation. Airlines scrambled to clean house. Multiple flight attendants across different carriers were quietly let go or suspended. Atlantic Skies wasn't the only one caught sleeping. It was just the first to get burned. And then came the hearings. Senator Clara Jefferson, a Black woman and former attorney, chaired the Senate Subcommittee on Consumer Rights. On national television, she asked one of the airline executives, "How many complaints does it take before a Black passenger's voice finally counts?" That question wasn't shouted. It wasn't screamed. It was whispered but it echoed louder than any airline apology ever could. The cameras kept rolling. The internet didn't blink. And for a moment, the entire country had no choice but to listen. Jessica Whitman, the flight attendant at the center of the storm, quickly became a symbol of a system cracking under its own weight. Her public apology fell flat. She tried to vanish from public life, retreating to private social media and applying for a job with a private charter company in Texas. But the world wasn't ready to forget. Within hours of her name entering their hiring system, her application was denied. The damage wasn't just to her image, but to the illusion of immunity. And just when it seemed like the saga was fading from headlines, it took another explosive turn. Marcus Allen received an envelope. No return address. No markings. Inside, a single document. A leaked internal memo from Atlantic Sky's HR department. His name was on it, before the flight had even taken off. What it revealed sent shockwaves through his legal team. Atlantic Skies maintained a secret internal watch list of passengers labeled as potential risks. Not for violence, not for breaking rules, but for having what they called an assertive demeanor, a history of voicing complaints, or the likelihood that they may record staff interactions. Translated? These were people who knew their rights and refused to be silenced. And a disturbingly large number of names on that list were Black and brown passengers. This wasn't just about a bad moment on a flight anymore. It was a systemic operation, an attempt to intimidate, silence, and pre-label passengers who dare to hold power accountable. Marcus's legal team immediately took action. What began as a civil complaint transformed into a potential federal case. Accusations of racial profiling, constitutional rights violations, and corporate cover-ups were now at the heart of the storm. The public had seen enough. Protests erupted at airports across the nation. LAX, JFK, Chicago O'Hare. Travelers raised handmade signs. Our skies, our rights. Bias doesn't fly here. Dignity doesn't require permission. Even airline employees had reached a breaking point. More than 200 Atlantic Skies workers signed an internal petition demanding executive resignations. Flight crews walked off their shifts in solidarity. The silence was breaking from inside and out. And then came the moment that truly shattered the ceiling. Tiffany Barnes, a Black flight attendant, appeared on 60 Minutes. Her voice steady, her story undeniable. We were told to stay neutral. But neutrality isn't safety. I once stood up for a Nigerian man being mocked by another crew member. I got written up. He got escorted off the plane. That's not neutrality. That's complicity. Her story made headlines. And within days, Congress called in 3 airline CEOs for testimony. The Department of Justice confirmed it had launched a full investigation into racial discrimination and profiling within commercial aviation. Atlantic Skies stepped down. 2 senior HR executives were fired, and a new slate of reforms was announced. Mandatory racial bias training, third-party oversight, public passenger rights disclosures. But most importantly, a new bill was introduced on the Senate floor. It was called the Marcus Act. And Marcus? He stayed mostly silent until one final interview aired on ABC News. He sat across from David Muir, calm, composed, but unflinching. I didn't argue. I didn't resist. I didn't yell. I just asked a question. Why me? And suddenly, the whole world answered back. Today, airports across the country display new posters reminding passengers of their rights. Flight manuals now include entire sections on de-escalation and cultural sensitivity. And perhaps most powerful of all, Black and brown passengers, once hesitant, once silent, are sharing their own stories. Loud, raw, unapologetically. But make no mistake, not everyone is ready for this change. The internet remains divided. Some praised Marcus's grace. Others accused him of ruining a woman's career, blaming cancel culture instead of confronting the truth. But here's the real question. If Marcus had been the one shouting, would anyone have listened? This was never just about one flight, one incident, one woman. This was about what happens when someone finally refuses to shrink in the face of authority. And that's what shook the system the most. Not the cameras, not the coverage, but the quiet, undeniable power of a black man standing still and demanding an answer. Now it's your turn. Have you ever been mistreated in a space meant to protect you? Do you believe stories like this are rare or just rarely recorded? And if you had witnessed this moment, what would you have done? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Like if you believe dignity doesn't need to be proven. Share this story so it reaches someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe because the next flight might carry another truth no one saw coming. In a world where silence protects the powerful, your voice is resistance. And sometimes the most radical act is simply standing up and asking, "Why me?"